අලුතෙන් SLT Mobitel Home 4G LTE connection ගන්නාට වටිනා tab computer සහ data දීමනා. අලුතෙන් SLT Mobitel Home 4G LTE connection ගන්නාට වටිනා tab computer සහ data දීමනා.
නව පෑස් සබන් සහ ක්‍රීම් ජාත්‍යන්තර ළමා රෝග පිළිබඳ විශේෂඥයන් විසින් සායනිකව තහවුරු කරලා තියෙන්නේ.
Tonight, public eruption. Dozens injured, 53 arrests and public property destroyed in a night of protests in Mirihana. Polls apart. UNP's Ranil Wickremesinghe calls for political parties to shy away from public protests, while the SJB's Sajid Premadasa demands the reins. Emergency assistance. The International Monetary Fund confirms imminent talks on a loan agreement.
Plan to initiate those discussions pretty much in the coming days.
Coming down. The PUCSL tones down power cuts to 8.5 hours tomorrow, while the business community calls for more warning. All this and much more coming up on First at 9 this Friday, the 1st of April 2022.
Lifebuoy shampoo chuti rupiah 70යි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Bringing you the latest news and views from across Sri Lanka, this is First at 9 and I'm David Ebert. In our top story tonight, the aftermath of the protest march that attempted to break through to the residence of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa last night has been severe, with dozens injured from both sides of the divide. Police and army vehicles were burned to cinders, while private property was also destroyed by some elements among the protesters, who the government is now labeling as extremist elements. A total of 53 protesters have been arrested by the police and produced before the Gangudeville Magistrates Court today. Last evening, pandemonium reigned in Mirihana when what was supposed to be a peaceful protest in the vicinity of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's residence located at Pangirivatta Road turned violent. The protest comprised mostly of residents of the Mirihana area who displayed placards at the Jubilee Post Junction, demanding solutions to problems faced by them at present from long power cuts, as well as gas and fuel shortages. The protesters marched along the Maragama Mirihana Road at around 7:30 p.m. towards Pangirivatta Road after the head of state had returned to his residence. However, security roadblocks had been set up to prevent them from entering the location. Motorists commuting along the route were also seen sounding their horns in support of the protesters. The protesters, who had by then been at the location for several hours, then attempted to break through the roadblocks in an attempt to enter Pangirivatta Road on 2 occasions. This resulted in security personnel comprising of the police riot squad and the special task force firing tear gas and using water cannons on the increasingly agitated crowds.
country from 2005.
Due to this, a confrontation between the protesters and the police ensued, resulting in several protesters seriously injured in the melee. By this time, a police bus had been parked at the top of Pagarivatta Road to block any attempts by the protesters to move towards the president's residence. However, during the ensuing confrontation between the police and the protesters, the bus was set on fire by unknown individuals. As the clashes between police and protesters escalated, 2 army and police buses, 1 police jeep, a 3-wheeler and 2 traffic police motorcycles were also set on fire. In the end, 24 police personnel, including an assistant superintendent of police, received injuries during the clashes and were admitted to hospital. Afterwards, the police special task force manned the roadblocks to prevent protesters from breaking through. With the situation rapidly descending into more chaos and threatening to turn even more violent, IGP CD Vikramaratne declared a police curfew at several police divisions with immediate effect, namely the Nugegoda, Mount Lavinia, Colombo North, Colombo South, Colombo Central and Calonia police areas. It was finally lifted at 5 a.m. this morning. When morning dawned, the extent of the damage to public and private property was clearly disturbing. Meanwhile, by this evening, 15 protesters who were injured in the incidents were still under treatment at the Colombo National Hospital, the Colombo South Teaching Hospital and the Sri Jayawardhanapura Hospital. In the meantime, the Presidential Media Division issued a statement today accusing a group of organized extremist elements of having been at the center of the violence last night. The statement also alleges that the group had led the agitation by calling for an Arab Spring in the country on social media. According to the Mirihana police, a total of 53 protesters have been taken into custody so far, with more arrests expected. Political representatives and civil activists visited the Mirihana police station today to inquire into their status. The arrested persons were produced before the Gangodawila Magistrates Court today. Meanwhile, several media personnel, including our very own AdaDerana correspondents, were assaulted by police while covering yesterday's protest. Journalists have accused the police of having beaten them despite having identified themselves as members of the media. Our AdaDerana Colombo correspondent Sumedha Sanjeeva, who was among those assaulted, was also arrested and produced in court today. During the protests that took place near the residence of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa in Mirihana last evening, several AdaDerana correspondents who were covering the protests were subjected to assault by the police. Colombo regional correspondent Nisanga Verapitiya was injured during the protests and was admitted to the National Hospital in Colombo. Verapitiya then underwent surgery today due to the seriousness of his injuries. Colombo correspondent Sumedha Sanjeeva, meanwhile, was also assaulted by the police while he was covering the protest and was afterwards taken into police custody. The injured correspondent was brought to the Kalabovida Teaching Hospital today in a police bus where he received treatment while under police custody. Further, AdaDerana regional correspondent for Nugegoda Pradeep Sanjeeva Vikramasinghe also sustained injuries to his hand. In the meantime, Avanka Kumara, a correspondent of Sirasa News First 2, came under police assault while covering the protest. United National Party leader Ranil Wickremesinghe has urged the government to provide proof to back its claims of extremist elements being behind the Mirihana protests yesterday and expose them to the public. In a special statement issued today, Wickremesinghe also called on political parties to stay away from peaceful public protests and to instead engage in a process that finds solutions to the people's problems through an apolitical process.
පීඩාවට පත් ජනතාවගේ ගැටලුවට විසඳුම් නොතිබුණු නිසා ඊයේ රාත්‍රියේ මිරිහානේ පැංගිරිවත්තේ පිපිරීමක් ඇති වුණා. එයින් මෙතෙක් පැවති ආර්ථික අර්බුදය දේශපාලන අර්බුදයක් බවට පත් වුණා. මෙම පිපිරීම වර්තමාන දේශපාලන ක්‍රමයේ කඩාවැටීමක් ලෙස හැඳින්විය හැකිය. පීඩාවට පත් ජනතාවගේ ගැටලු විසඳීමට ආණ්ඩුව අසාර්ථක වුණා. එලෙසම විපක්ෂයත් අසාර්ථක වෙලා තිබෙනවා. මේ සිද්ධිය පිළිබඳ ආණ්ඩුව විවිධ කණ්ඩායම් පිළිබඳ චෝදනා කරන අතර ඒ සම්බන්ධයෙන් සාක්ෂි සහ තොරතුරු ඉදිරිපත් කර කවුද යන්න හෙළි කළ යුතුයි. විශේෂයෙන්ම මේ සිද්ධියේදී ජාතිවාදී ප්‍රකාශ කිරීමෙන් වැළකිය යුතුය. මෙය ජාතිවාදී සිද්ධියක් නොවේ. මෙය ත්‍රස්තවාදී සිද්ධියක් නොවේ. එවැනි ප්‍රකාශ කිරීමෙන් මේ තත්ත්වය තවත් උග්‍ර විය හැටිය. ජුබිලි කණුවේ තිබෙන උද්ඝෝෂණ සියල්ලම සාමකාමී උද්ඝෝෂණය. නමුත් පැංගිරිවත්තේදී ඒ ස්වරූපය වෙනස් වුණා. ඒ අවාසනාවන්ත සිද්ධියක්. මේ පිළිබඳ විවිධ මත ප්‍රකාශ කරනවා. අපි එක කරුණක් මතක තියාගත යුතුය. සාමකාමී උද්ඝෝෂණයකදී කිසිම පුද්ගලයෙක්ට හානියක් සිදු නොවිය යුතුය. එමෙන්ම ප්‍රචණ්ඩත්වයටත් ඉඩ නොදිය යුතුය. ජනතාවට සාමකාමීව නිදහසේ තමන්ගේ විරෝධය ප්‍රකාශ කිරීමට උද්ඝෝෂණය කිරීමට අයිතියක් තිබෙනවා. ජනතාවගේ ඒ උද්ඝෝෂණ වලට දේශපාලන පක්ෂ සහභාගී නොවිය යුතුය. ප්‍රමාද වුවත් පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට දැන් වගකීමක් තියෙනවා. පීඩාවට පත් වුණ ජනතාවට පිළිගත හැකි විසඳුම් පාර්ලිමේන්තුවෙන් ඉදිරිපත් කළ යුතුයි. එය පක්ෂ ભેදයෙන් තොරව ජාතික එකත්වයක් ඇතුව අපි ක්‍රියා කරන්නට තිබෙනවා.
We'll be back with more local news right after this break. Stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. Opposition leader Sajid Premadasa has called the assault of protesters during yesterday's Mirihana protests as state-sponsored terrorism. In a statement today, the opposition leader repeated his previous calls for the government to resign and hand over the reins of power to his party that he says is capable of solving the problems of the people.
රාජ්‍ය දේපල පෞද්ගලික දේපල විනාශ කරනවට අපි පක්ෂපාතී නැහැ. ඒවා සිදු නොවිය යුතු දේවල්. නමුත් යම් කණ්ඩායම් මේ රටේ පොදු ජනතාවගේ බලවේගය කඩාකප්පල් කරන්නට යම් කුමන්ත්‍රණකාරී ක්‍රියාදාමයන් දියත් කළාදෝ කියන සැකය අපේ සිත් තුළ තිබෙනවා. අද මේ රාජ්‍ය ත්‍රස්තවාදය උපයෝගී කරගන්නමින් අප රටේ ජනතාවගේ සිවිල් අයිතිය, මානව අයිතිය, දේශපාලන අයිතිය අමුවේ උල්ලංඝනය කරන්නට කටයුතු කරන මොහොතක අපි පැහැදිලිව කියනවා අපි හිටගන්නේ පොදු ජනතාවගේ පැත්තේ. මේ වන විට මේ සිද්ධීන් මුල් කරගෙන රජයේ බලධාරීන් උත්සාහ දරුවොත් සම්ප්‍රදාන කූල මාධ්‍ය සමාජ මාධ්‍ය මර්ධනය කරන්නට අපි දේශීයවත් විදේශීයවත් එම ප්‍රයත්නයන් පරාජය කරන්නට ගත හැකි ඉහළම පියවර තබන්නට අපි සූදානම්. රජයෙන් ඉල්ලීමක් කරනවා කරුණා කරලා මිනිස්සුන්ගේ ප්‍රශ්න වලට විසඳුම් ලබා දෙන්න. ඔබට නොහැකි නම් රටේ ප්‍රශ්න විසඳන්න වහාම ජනාධිපතිවරයා ප්‍රමුඛ ආණ්ඩුව ඉල්ලා අස්වෙලා ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍රවාදීව ජනමතයට ඉඩ ලබා දෙන වැඩපිළිවෙලකට යොමු වෙලා වැඩ කළ හැකි ආණ්ඩුවකට අවස්ථාව සලසා දෙන්න.
International Monetary Fund spokesperson Jerry Rice confirmed yesterday that the fund intends to hold discussions with the Sri Lankan government on a possible loan facility to help it tide over the country's economy. Meanwhile, Sri Lanka, which is expected to settle almost $4 billion in debt payments this year, is reportedly expecting to also seek World Bank assistance after it enters into an IMF program. The International Monetary Fund has confirmed that it will initiate discussions with the Sri Lankan authorities on a possible loan program in the coming days to stave off a severe economic crisis. Speaking to media personnel at the weekly IMF briefing yesterday, spokesperson Jerry Rice said the discussions would continue during the visit of Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa to Washington for IMF and World Bank spring meetings this month. Since January 2020, Sri Lanka has been left struggling to pay for essential imports, including food and fuel, leading to growing unrest and even military deployments at fuel stations.
The Sri Lankan authorities have expressed interest in an IMF-supported financial program. The answer is yes. On the status of that discussion, we plan to initiate those program discussions with the Sri Lankan authorities, including during the finance minister's visit to Washington in April. So we plan to initiate those discussions pretty much in the coming days, and that will include during the expected visit of the finance minister of Sri Lanka to Washington for our spring meetings in April.
Further, Sri Lanka, which is expected to settle almost $4 billion in debt repayments this year, is reportedly expecting to also seek World Bank assistance after it enters into an IMF program. Now, Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit, has expressed condemnation of what he called the failure of the government to address the people's needs and urges the people to stand up and call for a major system change that rejects corruption in all its forms. He also stated that his door has been closed to all politicians and prefers to avoid dealings with all of them.
මහජනතාවගේ වේදනාවට සහ පීඩාවට සවන් නොදී රජය ගෙන යන අදූරදර්ශී අසංවේදී හා ආත්මාර්ථකාමී වැඩපිළිවෙල මම හෙලා දකින බව ප්‍රකාශ කරන්නට කැමැතියි. දූෂණය අරගෙන බලන්න අවුරුදු ගණනාවක් තිස්සේ දූෂිතයන් කියලා හඳුන්වන කට්ටිය ඒ කට්ටිය දූෂිතයෝ කියන අය ඊළඟ ආපු කට්ටිය දූෂිතයෝ නෙමෙයි කියලා. ඊට පස්සේ තවත් කට්ටියකට දූෂිතයෝ කියලා කියනවා. මේ දූෂිතයෝ කියන අයෝ කවුද කාටද දඬුවම් දුන්නේ? මම කුඩා කාලේ බ්‍රයිබරි කමිෂන් කියලා එකක් තිබුණා ඒ දවස්වල. ඒ බ්‍රයිබරි කමිෂන් එකෙන් වරදකරුවන් ලෙස හඳුනාගත්තු മന്ത്രിවරුන් 7 දෙනෙකුව පාර්ලිමේන්තුවෙන් එළියට දැම්මා. විශේෂ ඒ පනත අනුව කවුද මේ පනත අහෝසි කළේ? අද චර දූෂිතයෝ හිටියත් එක දූෂිතයෙක්වත් පාර්ලිමේන්තුවෙන් එළියට දාන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ නිසා මේ ක්‍රමවේදය නිසා තමයි මේ ජනතාව පීඩා විඳින්නේ. ඒ නිසා මේ රට තුල විශාල වෙනසක් ඇති යුතුයි කියලායි මම විශ්වාස කරන්නේ. රටේ ජනතාව නැගී ඉඳලා කියන්න ඕනේ දේශපාලන නායකත්වයට මේ වැඩේ නවත්තන්න දැන්. අපිට අලුත් ආරම්භයක් අවශ්‍යයි. සාමාන්‍යයෙන් දේශපාලන ලෝකයේ ඈත් එක්ක ගනුදෙනු කරන්න දැන් කැමති නැහැ. මම කිසිම කෙනෙකුට මේ දොරවල් ඇරලා නැහැ. මොකද ඒ තරමටම මට ඒ අය ගැන පැහැදීමක් නැති තත්වයක් උදා වෙලා තියෙනවා අවාසනාව.
The Public Utilities Commission has filed a fundamental rights petition in the Supreme Court today, calling for an order to be issued to the central bank and treasury officials to release $200 million to purchase sufficient fuel to ensure uninterrupted power supplies. Meanwhile, the Commission also announced a reduced power cut schedule for tomorrow of 8.5 hours. Today, the Kalani Tessa combined cycle power plant came into operation as the Ministry of Energy has managed to supply 1.2 million litres of diesel or 423 metric tons to begin power generation. Further, a stock of fuel from the 6,000 metric ton diesel stock secured by the Ministry of Energy from Lanka IOC is expected to be supplied to the West Coast Power Plant in Kedavalapitiya today as well. In the meantime, the Public Utilities Commission has approved a revised 8.5-hour power cut schedule for tomorrow, with the CEB expecting fuel stocks from the 38,200 metric ton diesel shipment that is expected to arrive through the Indian line of credit tonight. It believes that power cuts could be reduced to 4 hours in the next few days. Meanwhile, taking the long scheduled power cuts into account, the Public Utilities Commission filed a fundamental rights petition today, calling for the Supreme Court to issue a ruling to ensure uninterrupted power supplies to the public. Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa, Treasury Secretary S.R. Artigala, Energy Minister Gamini Lokuge, Ministry Secretary KDR Olga, Central Bank Governor Ajit Niwad Cabral and the Monetary Board, the Ceylon Electricity Board, the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation and the Attorney General have been named as respondents. The petitioner claims that government authorities have been warned of an imminent power crisis since 2016. With that, the petitioner has requested the court to issue an order to the Central Bank Governor, the Monetary Board and the Treasury Secretary to allocate the $200 million necessary to purchase fuel to provide uninterrupted power supplies.
දවස් දෙකකට කලින් තිබ්බා එක දිගට පැය 10ක් දාලා විදුලි කප්පා. මේ ඔක්කොම කරන්නේ මේ විදුලි ඉංජිනේරුවරුන් එතන ඉන්න. ඒකට කිසිම මානුෂීය හැඟීමක් නැහැ. ඒ වගේම ඩොලර් එක අපි දන්නවා දැන් පා කරලා තියෙන එක පා වෙලා යනවා. මම හිතන්නේ රුවල් නැති නැවක් වගේ එහෙට මෙහෙට යනවා. මහ බැංකුව විසින් කරනු ලබන වැරදි ෆිස්කල් ඇන්ඩ් මොනිටරි පොලිසිස් නිසා අපිට මේ තත්ත්වය ඇති වෙලා තියෙනවා. අපි දන්නවා මීට මාස දෙකකට කලින් ඩොලර් මිලියන් 500ක් ගෙව්වා ලෝන් ගත්තේ. ණයක් කිව්වේ නැහැ කියලා අපිව මේ බ්ලැක් ලිස්ට් කරා කියලා අපිට අපේ ආර්ථික කඩා වැටෙන්නේ. අපි මේ වගේ වැරදි මූල්‍ය ප්‍රතිපත්ති මේ පුද්ගලයන් විසින් තමන්ගේ අභිමතයට කරන නිසා තමයි මේ තත්ත්වය ඇතිලා තියෙන්නේ. මේ තත්ත්වය අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම ඉදිරි දවස් දෙක තුන ඇතුළතදී අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම වෙනස් විය යුතුයි.
The Ceylon Chamber of Commerce has issued a special statement today calling on the government to take steps to ensure uninterrupted fuel and power supplies to avoid hampering the country's business and public activities. It also calls for a clear communication on the availability of power and scheduled power cut arrangements with adequate notice. The Ceylon Chamber of Commerce has expressed serious concerns over the continuous deterioration in fuel and electricity availability in the country that is hampering daily operations of businesses and public activities. In a statement issued today, the Chamber says that it believes that there is a need to maintain sufficient fuel stocks to balance both transport and power generation needs. It also calls for clear and transparent communication with the public and the business community on the availability of power, and also calls for clear communication of scheduled power cut arrangements with adequate notice. The Chamber is also of the view that the need of the hour is to address the country's forex shortage by fast-tracking the process of debt restructuring and regaining access to dollar financing sources. It has also welcomed steps taken by the government in going to the International Monetary Fund for assistance and urges it to fast-track the process of appointing financial and legal advisors, as this will halt any future principal and interest payments of debt and allow current reserves to be used to meet the immediate needs of the people. The Chamber also calls on businesses and the public at large to conserve the use of fuel and power at this crucial juncture. Now, the all-share price index at the Colombo Stock Exchange saw a massive 432-point loss today to end at 8,471.43 points. Meanwhile, the S&P SL20 index of more liquid stocks ended at 2,830 points after losing 200 points. The S&P circuit breaker, meanwhile, tripped thrice during the day, hence the market closed at 11:33 a.m. During the week, the ASPI and the S&P SL20 lost 18.97 and 22.21% respectively. Market turnover was 1.2 billion rupees. The food, beverage and tobacco sectors were the top contributors to turnover, while the transportation sector was the second highest. Foreign purchases amounted to 412 million rupees, while foreign sales were 556 million rupees. In the meantime, US stock index futures rose today ahead of US employment data, with markets watching for signs of inflation, while oil was poised for a 13% weekly fall following reserve releases. Welcome back. A collapse of a shaft at a mine in Serbia has killed 8 people and injured 20 more. Rescuers were trying to determine how many miners were trapped in the shaft of the mine located in the southern town of Aleksinac, 200 kilometers from Belgrade. The head of the local hospital was quoted as saying all non-essential surgery had been cancelled and some patients had been discharged to make room for casualties. It is said that 3 of the hospitalized miners are in serious condition. 49 have said to be on the rota at the time of the accident, and most of them are area residents. The coal mine manager said that security measures are at the highest level at the coal mine, but this time there was a sudden release of methane, and simply the monitoring and equipment that were in place did not help. The Aleksinac coal mine is prone to methane saturation, and in November 1989, some 90 miners died in an explosion there. Meanwhile, Vietnam is seeking to import more coal from Australia to ease a shortage of the fossil fuel for electricity production. Its Ministry of Industry and Trade has asked the Australian Embassy in Hanoi to arrange a meeting with Australian suppliers to sign new contracts aiming to have the additional coal delivered from later on this month. Vietnam's state-run Vietnam Electricity yesterday warned of electricity shortages from next month due to tight coal supplies, adding that several of its coal-fired power plants had to cut their run rates. Vietnam turned from a net coal exporter to a net importer nearly a decade ago and has been importing mainly from Indonesia and Australia. Vietnam's coal imports from Australia totaled 15.6 million tons last year, accounting for 43% of its total coal imports. Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a decree today on new rules of natural gas trade with unfriendly countries and regions, vowing to halt existing contracts if these buyers refuse to pay in rubles. President Putin said that those countries must be open to ruble accounts in Russian banks, and those accounts will be used to pay for the gas supplies starting from today. He said that if such payments are not made, they will consider this a default on the part of buyers responsible for all the ensuing consequences. Putin called the transfer of payments for Russian gas to rubles as an important step towards strengthening their financial and economic sovereignty. The price of gas in Europe jumped to more than $1,450 per 1,000 cubic meters due to Russia's ruble decree. The price of May futures at the Dutch title transfer facility soared to $1,453 per 1,000 cubic meters. Russian Defense Ministry spokesman said today that the Russian troops used high-precision missiles to hit several large oil depots in Ukraine on Wednesday evening that supply fuel to the Ukrainian forces in the Donbas region. He also said that more than 50 Ukrainian military facilities were hit by Russian forces that night. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, Russian troops continued their offensive in Ukraine today, controlling a residential settlement and advanced 6 kilometers, and the armed forces in Luhansk also advanced 5 kilometers. In addition, the Russian Air Force shot down a Mi-24 helicopter and 4 drones from the Ukrainian Air Force. The ministry also released a video showing a Ka-52 Kamov helicopter destroying a military facility in Ukraine. And that's all the news we have for you tonight. We hope you join us again tomorrow at the same time. Good night.